All right, good morning. Welcome and thank you for joining us. To those of you who are new to our firm or do not know me, I am Lisa Ramirez, founding partner of U.S. Immigration Law Group. I was one of the first women and first Spanish speaker in Orange County to become a state bar certified immigration law specialist. And I've been practicing immigration law in Orange County, California for over 20 years. And I have had one primary goal in mind: to educate, equip, and empower some of the most vulnerable immigrant communities of our nation. Whether you're participating in this webinar because you are directly impacted by DACA or are concerned about those who are, I commend you for being here. I know that there is a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety around the impending Supreme Court decision. And although I understand that should DACA end, the impact will be great, I also believe, and I have for years have been interested in moving beyond the ordinary rhetoric of anxiety of DACA ending and to create a new conversation where we can think beyond DACA and create the future we want to see for our country. Let's be clear, DACA was never meant to be a permanent solution, and it significantly falls short of justice and equity. Please don't get me wrong, I am grateful for the opportunities that DACA has afforded so many individuals and young adults. In fact, years before DACA existed, I would visit various high schools, specifically in Santa Ana, and it broke my heart to see how we as taxpayers were literally throwing away a generation of youth. We told them to work hard, to study hard. Many of them became valedictorians of their class, only to be told at the end of the day that they couldn't work, they couldn't join the military, and that their scholarships, and sometimes they were full ride scholarships, were being retracted for the lack of a social security number. So yes, DACA has helped, and we've come a long way with DACA. However, DACA is not the solution, and DACA is not the answer for many of our immigration issues and needs. I realize that I'm probably preaching to the choir, that most of you could probably share stories of your own about what DACA has meant to you, has meant to those around you, and what life without DACA would look like. However, the purpose of us putting together this webinar today is for me to be able to share with you that should DACA end, life does not end with DACA. Your dreams and your educational pursuits do not end with DACA. Your future and the future of your family is not over. But there is work to be done, and we need to be able to work together if we're going to want to see real change. For the last decade, our firm has collaborated with various religious, educational, and nonprofit institutions in providing education forums that will educate, equip, and empower immigrants and their families. We do everything we possibly can to equip our community with the most accurate and up-to-date information possible that will allow immigrants and their families to know what, if any, legalization opportunities they have available to them. Again, if you haven't had a consultation with an immigration attorney, this is not a business development kind of ploy or commercial for our firm, but I highly recommend that you consult with an immigration attorney regarding your options beyond DACA. We have seen miracles of young people not even being aware that they're US citizens, they believing that they were undocumented, but they actually acquired US citizenship through their parents. I'm very proud of the work that we've been able to do for so many of our DACA clients. In fact, many of them are now lawful permanent residents and US citizens, because we were able to carefully strategize their case to ensure that they didn't accumulate unlawful presence. And so some of them were able to consular process because they had received DACA before turning 18, or we were successful in obtaining advanced parole, where they were able to adjust status in the United States with this lawful entry because they, married a US citizen years later. Providing these valuable legal services has been a privilege for our attorneys, and we get to see firsthand the freedom and access our clients gain when they are afforded reliable support. However, I'm also very aware that even the very best legal services is simply not enough. I do believe that we're at a very unique moment in history, politically, racially, socioeconomically, and that this generation will have a significant impact on the direction of this nation. Right now, our commitment to freedom, justice, and equity needs to be stronger than ever. To that end, my hope at the end of this presentation will be that we all leave perhaps a bit more inspired to take action to transform the immigration laws and policies of this country to create a more just, free, and equitable society. That we would re-engage in public life in a new and different way than we're accustomed to, whether we're US citizens or not. Know that every single one of us has a voice, and we need to learn to exercise our voice, not just in the streets, in the form of public protest, as valuable as that may be, but in the halls of Congress. And ultimately, we need to work and be engaged in changing the outcome of this next election. I hope that each one of you, given your backgrounds, your gifts, your talents, your education, can be thinking about new modes of expression, whether it be writing, film, theater, social media, or business, to share your stories or the stories of your loved ones in the world. In the years that I've been involved with public policy and advocacy and lobbying, I've learned one thing, and that is that statistics can go either way, and statistics don't change human hearts, but it's the human stories and the faces that change people's hearts. I'm just a lawyer, and there's so many talented and gifted individuals that I'm speaking to right now that can use the education and experience and gifts and talents that you have to be able to reach an audience that I wouldn't otherwise be able to reach. I'd also like us to leave dreaming bigger, that we can dream, and we use that word, you know, I guess the pun intended of the DREAM Act, that we dream bigger, and that the act in the DREAM Act needs some action. And so I hope you can be thinking about actions that you might be able to take so that we can get beyond DACA. And then lastly, I would encourage those of us in positions of privilege, whether we're professionals, educators, leaders, business owners, to open the doors for documented and undocumented or undocumented young people so that they can rise and thrive and lead. So again, I want to thank you for being with us this morning. I'll go ahead and get started into the content of the presentation. But for me, more important than the content is actually the context, the lens through which we are all having this conversation together. And I welcome your feedback. I welcome your questions. Feel free to write them in the chat, and we'll have an opportunity to respond to people's questions at the end. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so what is DACA? I want to be very clear, and most of you probably know this already, but DACA is not legal status, okay? Deferred action is something that has existed for decades. It doesn't exist just for recent childhood arrivals. It is just temporary protection from deportation and work authorization. It's important, it's valuable. It gives people a way to be able to work, to get a social security number. It provided a valuable way in which people were able to travel and obtain legal entry. Unfortunately, advanced parole is no longer available for DACA. Unfortunately, no new applications are being accepted. But nonetheless, DACA certainly helped many, many individuals. Something we also don't often hear or talk about is that DACA prevented and prevents the accumulation of unlawful presence. So that is important because those of you who received DACA before the age of 18 essentially could not, under the law, have accumulated unlawful presence. If you don't accumulate unlawful presence, then that basically means that you won't trigger a PAR if you were to depart the United States to go through consular processing to be able to legalize your status, to apply for permanent residency. Again, it doesn't pardon other unlawful presence or immigration violation. So if you didn't get DACA until you were 19 or 24, you have still that period of time of unlawful presence accumulated, and you need to be aware of that. And once, should DACA end, you will also begin to accumulate that unlawful presence. So I know that the decision from the Supreme Court is imminent. We don't have a lot of time, but for those of you who haven't had their case assessed, I encourage you to do so as soon as possible, because you want to see if there's anything that you could or should do before you would begin accumulating unlawful presence should DACA end. So like I said, in terms of the current state of DACA, there's no new initial applications, which is really heartbreaking for me because it really takes us back to pre-DACA. This incoming freshman class, in terms of our colleges and universities, are the first class that did not have DACA available, meaning that they were either younger than 15 when DACA was terminated and were not given the opportunity to apply because the Trump administration had ended the acceptance of new applications. So now, those of you who have DACA, until DACA ends, and again, we don't know what the Supreme Court is going to decide. I'm going to walk you through what the possible outcomes might be. But at least between now and then, I highly encourage those of you with DACA to file the renewals. The policy before that has been in place for several years is that individuals can renew their DACA if it's set to expire within 150 days. So that's 5 months. We're really encouraging people, even if it's 6, 7, 8 months out, to go ahead and file renewals. We've seen those successfully go through without any problem. And our hope is, right, in doing this, is that even if DACA should end, those individuals may, and again, we don't know for sure, there's so many unknowns at this time, but may be able to keep their DACA provisions and prevent the accumulation of unlawful status, be able to work until that new card expires. The other possibility is there's several pieces of legislation, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, but Congress at any point in time may pass legislation to create a permanent fix. And I'm going to talk about 2 of those options today, but I highly encourage all of you to communicate with your congressional representative, even if you're not a US citizen, and really encourage them to push forward this legislation. I know that there's so much going on in Congress right now with regards to COVID and stimulus package and the economy, and there's other priorities. But unless they hear from us, DACA and legalization opportunities, immigration as a whole, will essentially just sit at the back burner. So it is really our responsibility to be engaged and to really encourage our congressional representatives to take action. The last point that I will mention with regards to the current state of DACA, and some of you may or may not be aware of this, but in December, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services had come out with a federal regulation that would allow them to increase fees across the board. Those of you who kind of keep aware of the news, USCIS has been facing tremendous financial strain. It doesn't sound like they've made much changes in the periods of COVID where they were working with reduced staffing, but I think their staff were continuing to be paid, and as a result, they are in a position to ask for relief from Congress, because usually the immigration fees cover the cost of the operations of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is the benefits branch of the Department of Homeland Security, but they're running out of funding. And so one of those things to kind of cover their increase of costs is that they've proposed to increase a variety of number of application fees across the board, and DACA would be one of them. So in addition to having to pay the $495 to renew your DACA application, USCIS is proposing to actually create a new fee for the I-821D, which is the DACA application. So right now there is no fee for that application, and they are proposing to impose a fee of $275. So should DACA continue, I just want that to be on your radar of a real possibility that new fees will be imposed. All right, so let's go ahead and start talking about the possible outcomes of the Supreme Court decision. So, potential outcome number one, the Supreme Court concludes that courts do not have the legal authority to review the Trump administration's decision to terminate DACA. I think that this is a real possibility, to be quite honest. My professional opinion or guesstimate would be this is likely the outcome to happen. And it really is unfortunate in the sense that it really doesn't allow the Supreme Court to comment or to make a decision on the merits, right, of DACA and the decision to terminate. But eventually, it essentially just establishes that they don't have jurisdiction, that they're not able to even review an executive order that created DACA and the executive order that terminated DACA. So if that were the case, essentially the current injunctions that are in place that are allowing people to continue to renew their applications would not be valid. Therefore, USCIS would not accept any new applications of renewals, right? So we already know the initial applications are no longer be accepted, but it would essentially halt the filing of any renewal applications on the date of the decision. So then the second question is, well, what then would happen? So it's going to really be up to this administration in terms of how they want to implement its decision to end DACA. So it's one thing to say, okay, DACA ends, but it's another question as to how will DACA end, right? So the Trump administration will get to decide like what to do with the DACA applications that have since been filed prior to this decision coming up. Are they going to continue to process them and just not accept new applications? Are they going to stop the processing and adjudication of those applications and return the application fees to the applicants? Are they going to recall the work permits that have been recently issued or that are still valid? We don't know. So we really don't know. So although we know the what, should the Supreme Court decide it does not have the jurisdiction to review the decision to terminate DACA, we don't know exactly how that's going to be implemented by this administration. So that's option number one. Option number two is that they decide on the merits of the case. And I just realized, I'm sorry, this whole time I just realized that my video has not been showing and I don't know why. I apologize for that. I am not able to show my video. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Yeah, I'm not able to start my video and I do not know why. I'm sorry, this whole time I thought my camera was on and that the video was started. Give me just 1 second, I apologize for this. All right, there we go. I just think I started all over. Okay. All right. I apologize for that. All this time I thought my video was on. I'm sorry. Thank you for alerting me to that. So the second possible outcome with the Supreme Court decision is that the court concludes basically on the merits of the case that the manner in which the Trump administration terminated DACA is in fact lawful, right? So the outcome is essentially the same in terms of number one and number two, because that would essentially mean DACA ends. And then again, the Trump administration will need to decide how to end DACA. So it'll need to decide whether to continue to process the DACA renewal applications that's already been received at the time that the court issues its decision, whether to allow the work permits to expire or for them to recall those work permits and have those individuals send those work permits back to the government. If the court concludes that DACA itself is unlawful, then we basically need to kiss DACA goodbye, that there's really going to be no way for any new first-time applicants to file their DACA application. The government's going to stop accepting the DACA renewal applications. And then again, depending on what the administration decides to do, will dictate whether the work permits that individuals currently have will remain valid or not. So one of the questions that we get quite often with regards to work permits and social security numbers, so even if you have a social security number but not a valid work permit, all of the social security cards basically should have a provision on them written that it's not valid without work authorization. So essentially, if you go to, if your employer is, following the law and verifying you for purposes of I-9 and making sure that you still have work authorization, or if you're looking for a job and the employer is following the law in terms of asking you for evidence of your ability to work in the United States, despite the fact that that social security number is yours, it will be yours for life regardless of your legal status, it doesn't allow you to work without having that work permit available to you as well. So your social security number does remain valid for filing taxes or for other purposes. However, it will not allow an individual to work unless they have work authorization. Okay, and then obviously I think this is the outcome that many of us are hoping for. And again, I don't want to put too much emphasis on DACA, and I don't want people to settle for DACA or think that DACA is enough. I think my hope, again, in putting together this webinar is that we can think and push beyond DACA, because DACA, even if it continues, is really not an ideal long-term solution. So the potential outcome number 3 is that the court concludes that yes, it has jurisdiction to remove to review an executive order to terminate DACA, and it rules that the termination is unlawful. Now, I want to be very clear, even if that is the ruling of the court, there's still a lot of uncertainty regarding the future of DACA. So option A under this potential outcome is that it could basically take us back to September 4th, 2017, which is the day before the government announced it was terminating DACA. So then that means new first-time applications would be accepted, renewals will continue to be accepted, advanced parole may also be available. However, we will need to wait to see if the court's decision limits any of those benefits or processes or whatever clarifying information may be made available through the court's decision. So we want to be very wary. It's not going to be, business as usual. It's an automatic kind of back to how things were pre-DACA. And I think the third point in terms of the potential outcome under this decision is that we really don't know how the Trump administration is going to respond. So again, it could make another effort, and we've seen this administration do this before. So if the Supreme Court is very specific in terms of the illegality of the way in which DACA was terminated, then the Trump administration could essentially just try and end DACA again, but slightly differently, right? To make sure they avoid whatever aspects of the termination were deemed unlawful. So again, it's not going to be, DACA forever. It's still going to mean that there could be future actions taken by the administration that impacts the future of DACA and the availability of DACA for individuals. All right, before I jump to pending legislation, I just want to see if there might be any questions that folks have at this point regarding DACA. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and write those in the chat, and if not, then I will just continue. All right, let's keep moving on. All right, so I want to, so someone asked here, do you know when this will happen? So what we know right now, and I'm sure all of you have heard and read, and if you're connected with a number of other community groups, we anticipated the decision before the end of the Supreme Court session, right? So they typically end their annual session in June. Sometimes it's in the early June, mid-June. It could be in the end of June. Some people are saying that this session may go beyond June into early July, but we anticipate the decision to be issued before the end of this month. And we anticipate the decision to come out probably on a Monday or a Thursday, is basically what we've heard in terms of the schedule. So I would just kind of be on alert for the next couple of weeks. Our office will be doing a Q&A the day following the decision to give people, it'll give us an opportunity to actually read the decision, to be able to provide intelligent advice, but I think also to get reaction from those people that are very worried or anxious regardless of what the outcome might be. So it'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions, and whether they're specific to your situation or just generally speaking regarding DACA. So if you haven't signed up for our e-newsletter, please do that through our website. That way you can be alerted when that Q&A will go live. We're also working with Congressman Lou Correa's office to do a press conference education session, I think the morning of the decision. So given the time difference on the East Coast and the West Coast, it may be too early for some of you, but we will be doing that, with them to support their efforts to ensure that all of you and our immigrant communities have good information. And we really want to reduce the stress and anxiety that is prevalent in our communities today. So someone else asked, wondering what I think we can do to civilians to advocate for DACA. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Again, if you ask me, there really isn't a whole lot that can be done to advocate for DACA, right? So the Supreme Court is not a governing body that you can lobby as you would Congress or your local city or county. So they're strictly doing a legal analysis based on case law and statute interpretation. So I think the Supreme Court is very aware of people's position on DACA. Hold on one second. I just got a notification that it logged me out, and I just want to make sure that okay, I'm hoping that you guys can still hear me. I just got a Zoom pop-up about being logged out, and I'm praying that that is not the case. Okay. So in terms of advocating for DACA, there really isn't a whole lot. And I really don't want people at this point in the game to really waste their time and energy to advocate for DACA. I really, and again, at the end of this presentation, I'm really hoping that everyone is left with energy and desire and inspiration to advocate for legalization, right? Something beyond DACA, something that will give these young adults access to permanent residency and to US citizenship. That's really what this country needs right now. So please don't misunderstand me. I think DACA is beneficial and useful. I just don't think it's a great solution. And I think that there are other pieces of legislation that we really need to get behind and we really need to be pushing. So that's what we're going to be going into next. So someone else asks, they're concerned that only their HR knows of their status and that their direct boss or supervisors do not. Not sure if I should be starting that conversation with them instead of waiting for a DACA final decision. It's premature. We really don't know what's going to happen to DACA, so I really wouldn't kind of make your status known or about DACA, to be quite honest, because you don't know. If the Supreme Court decision comes out terminating DACA, I anticipate that there's going to be some employers that are going to perhaps unlawfully terminate someone's employment because they think that they have to, and that may or may not be the case. We really don't know. We have to wait again for the decision to be able to know for sure exactly what impact that's going to have. All right. So let's go ahead and keep going. I'll give another opportunity for questions in the chat. So there's 3 pieces of legislation that are currently pending, right? So this isn't legislation that's just an idea out there that we're trying to get introduced. All 3 of these pieces of legislation have been introduced in either the Senate or the House of Representatives. So I'm going to talk about these pieces of legislation in somewhat detail because I think it's really important for everyone to be aware that they exist and to resurrect the conversation with their congressional representative, both your federal state senators and your congressional representatives. I'm one person, and whatever I can do to inspire, to support, to empower you, I feel we'll all be better for it, because you're going to be able to reach your networks and hopefully inspire those around you to be engaged. And really, until we come collectively together to be a single voice for legalization in this country, and I think the best chance we have of seeing real reform is with our young adults, with our DACA dreamers, whatever you want to refer to this population as, but those people who were brought here as children. I think that they politically are the most palatable in terms of, the spectrum of our political leaders to be able to support. I don't think we're going to see a lot of change in terms of major reform with regards to, adults with deportation, orders, removal orders, etc. But this is really our hope. But the beauty of it is, if we can make an impact with our young adults, if we can really get them permanent residency and eventually U.S. citizenship, and I'm not talking about a secondary class of legalization or status, but the same permanent residency that every other immigrant that, is afforded, they then may be able to in the future. And again, I'm a long-term thinker. I don't really think immediately. When people come in to our office for a consultation, they want to know if they qualify or not. I could tell them yes or no in the short term in terms of what they can do. Yes, we can file a petition, but I'm always looking long-term. I'm thinking, 3, 5, 10 years down the road in terms of what opportunities are going to be available to them. And a lot of lawyers don't think that way. They think, oh yes, you can file a petition, not really thinking about how someone's going to effectuate or use that petition to benefit them to be able to get permanent residency or U.S. citizenship. So with this legislation, again, because all of these pieces of legislation really afford our young adults to be able to get permanent residency, they will also eventually be able to get U.S. citizenship. And once they have U.S. citizenship, then there's additional opportunities that will open up for their loved ones, because U.S. citizens can petition for their parents, their siblings, their spouses, their minor children. So again, there's only more to be gained, but we've got to start somewhere. And in my opinion, this is where we start. But if we can't even get behind this legislation effectively and collectively, then DACA ends, we're really going to be, it's going to be detrimental. And it's not just for those with DACA, it's really us as a society. So I'm going to talk about 2 DREAM Acts. There's the DREAM Acts of 2019, one that is in the Senate, the other one was introduced in the House of Representatives, and then the American Dream and Promise Act. So these pieces of legislation are very, very similar. There might be, slight differences in terms of age eligibility, the amount of time or requirements to get conditional residency. The American Dream and Promise Act is much broader in the sense that it impacts not just dreamers or DACA, individuals with DACA, but it also affects people with temporary protected status. And some of you may have TPS, some of you may have family members with TPS, but we all know that, just as DACA was terminated, TPS has been terminated as well. And so the American Dream and Promise Act also does something for those with temporary protected status and those with deferred enforcement and departures. So let's go ahead and jump in. So I'm going to start first just talking about the DREAM Act of 2019. It's Senate Bill 874. So again, if you are speaking with your federal senators, then this is the bill that you're going to want to talk to them about, because this is currently residing in their house. So it will protect the dreamers from deportation, give them an opportunity for legal status. It's going to allow 700,000 individuals and at least another, and these probably are outdated because I put this presentation together sometime last year, and that number just continues to grow because of the number of people that would otherwise now be eligible for DACA, like I said, but weren't able to apply because they weren't 15 in 2017 when it was terminated. So at least 1.4 million eligible dreamers to be able to stay in the United States, to work, to live, to have the protections, and hopefully to gain permanent residency. It grants conditional permanent resident status for up to 8 years that allows them to work legally in the U.S. and to travel. And then if they do commit a serious crime that may impact their conditional residency status, and then it would automatically grant the conditional permanent resident status to DACA recipients. So you get to skip that first step. But once the individuals have their conditional permanent residence, they will essentially be able to then apply for their permanent residency, and then eventually, once they've had their permanent residency for 5 years, they can get U.S. citizenship. So in terms of the basic requirements, and I'm sharing with you these requirements, and those of you who are, DACA recipients or know people who are DACA recipients, or maybe you're undocumented, you don't even qualify for DACA, I want you to keep these requirements in mind, because there is absolutely no reason why people should not begin satisfying these requirements now. Don't wait until legislation is passed to scramble, to go back to school, to get your GED, to pursue whatever requirements you may need to fulfill. So the requirements are pretty basic: that they came to the United States at age 17 or younger, that they've lived in the United States for at least 4 years prior to the bill's enactment. So if this goes into effect, this year, then you would have to show that you've been living in the United States since 2016. They have to be people of good moral characters, no felony convictions, no multiple misdemeanors. So just a side comment perhaps. So this is very serious in terms of criminal convictions when it impacts immigration status. So for those of you that may have criminal convictions, and I know that we deal with a lot of them, we deal with them around the marijuana, even though it is a permissible substance under state law, it is still prohibited under federal law. We deal with people with DUIs quite often, young people that have DACA, that have lost DACA because of DUIs or other convictions. It is really important, especially those of you that are undocumented, to really walk a straight line and avoid any arrests, charges or convictions. And if you do have convictions now, I would really work very carefully, not just with any criminal defense attorney. You want to make sure they understand what can be done to help impact or to kind of clean the record for immigration purposes. So expungements, for example, do not work for immigration purposes. The government, the federal government, will see right through those. But there are other avenues for post-conviction relief. if there was a legal error committed in the case, if there was a constitutional right that was violated, a person wasn't told the immigration consequences before accepting a plea, there's a number of those, then you're going to want to get that evaluated now. Don't wait, because it may be too late. So just be very careful and make sure that you're getting these things addressed now ahead of time, so that if and when immigration reform happens, legislation is passed, you're going to be in a position to act immediately. So the government will subject these applicants to biometrics, which will evaluate their criminal history, biographic data. They will have to do a medical exam, again, to make sure that they don't have any communicable diseases. They will have to be admitted to a college or university, have earned a high school diploma, or are in the process of earning a high school diploma or the equivalent, like your GED. So again, the reason why the DREAM Act allows those with DACA to automatically get conditional residence is because these provisions are very, very similar to what was required for people to get DACA. Okay, and there will be an application fee. We don't know how much it's going to be associated with this process. So once an individual has conditional permanent residency, they can get non-conditional permanent residency, meaning just regular permanent residency for 10 years. At least the card is good for 10 years. It's essentially indefinite unless somebody has done something that would cause their green card status or permanent resident status to be revoked. But so long as they continue to maintain continuous residence in the United States, now there's a little bit of an additional hurdle. There's 3 tracks that need to be met: education, military, or work. So either you have completed 2 years of a bachelor's degree or higher degree program, so that may very well be an AA degree, or you've attended or graduated college or university. So again, my words of advice to you is keep going to school, don't stop. Or you've been able to serve at least 2 years of honorable military service. Obviously, that's something that can't be done unless you have that conditional residence to begin with. But let's say you got it and you decided to enlist in the military, then that would be the military track to satisfy this requirement. Or you've worked for at least 3 years, which is the employment or worker track, since receiving your conditional permanent residency. You will have to demonstrate the ability to read, write, and speak English and have a general understanding of American history. Again, these are the what's, not the how. So we really don't know until this legislation is passed, regulations have come out, exactly how that's going to be implemented. I imagine that it's going to be very similar to our naturalization examination, where this requirement is also in place, where people will have an interview of sorts, where there'll be, spoken to, they'll ask to write, a sentence in English. They'll be asked some questions that they'll need to answer correctly in order to pass the civics exam. You have to continue to demonstrate the good moral character, again, without felony or multiple misdemeanor convictions, and there will be a second application fee with this process. Okay, so those are kind of the very basic general requirements. I'm trying not to overwhelm anyone and provide too much information. I want to jump now to the American Dream and Promise Act that also exists, that I said is a little bit broader. The distinction between the two Dream Acts of 2019 between the House and the Senate are really not much different, that I didn't really need to go into the details of those differences. You kind of get a sense of those general requirements. So the American Dream and Promise Act would allow not just DACA people. Again, we're talking about all undocumented high school graduates or those that have obtained their GED. So again, if you did not graduate high school, go back and get your GED at the very least. You want to make sure that you're in the best position possible should either one of these pieces of legislation pass. And then it would also allow for over 300,000 temporary protected status holders, the TPS, and up to 3,600 individuals with deferred entry of deportation to have the opportunity to remain in the country. So again, similar to the DREAM Act of 2019, it allows for a conditional permanent residency as step 1. Small distinction, again, it's people for under the age of 18. The other one said 17. The same 4 years that you would have to establish your continuous presence. Again, if it gets passed this year, it would be, we're talking 2016. You have the same or similar, I should say, it's not exactly the same, similar educational requirements. So again, graduate from high school, get your DED, enroll in college, to make sure that you have your bases covered. And then some slight distinctions here, but again, the point I would want to leave you with is just please, please, please avoid any criminal arrests, charges, or convictions. But there are some exceptions to the American Dream and Promise Act. So as I mentioned before, expungements have not previously worked for immigration purposes, but there is a provision in the American Dream and Promise Act that may allow an individual to have their record expunged and show rehabilitation that would allow them to qualify despite their convictions. But this piece of legislation, this bill, does outline some very specific crimes that would deem people ineligible. Things like the domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, child abuse. You see the list there on this slide. So again, point being, avoid any criminal acts, behavior, arrests, charges, and convictions. So again, similar to the DREAM Act, those that have DACA would automatically qualify for the conditional permanent residency. And it would also cancel the deportation proceedings. If those Dreamers are eligible for conditional permanent residency, this is huge because we represent individuals in removal proceedings, regularly. And if we could essentially get those cases terminated, because someone meets the conditional permanent resident requirements, it just alleviates so much stress and cost and risk, right? Because if they're not successful in defending themselves in court, they will be issued a removal order and deported from the United States. So one of the beauties, again, of the American Dream and Promise Act, it will cancel proceedings, removal proceedings for Dreamers who are eligible. Again, similar to the DREAM Act, the second step would be lawful permanent residency. They do also have the 3 tracks: the higher education, the military service, and the work. The small distinction I would just point out here is that you have to demonstrate, if you're going to go down the work track, that you had to have worked for a total period of 3 years, at least 75% of that time that you had employment authorization, unless you're simultaneously enrolled in school, in higher education or technical school. And again, you need to maintain continuous status. Again, similar to the DREAM Act, you have to demonstrate the ability to rewrite and speak in English. You'll have to pass the background and security check. There will also be an application fee associated with this application. Dreamers may be able to directly apply for lawful permanent residency status, again, if they already satisfy the conditional permanent residency status, and they can just essentially skip step 1 and go directly to this step. There's also a provision in the American Dream and Promise Act that creates a hardship waiver. So if the applicant, and we do have some DACA applicants or DACA recipients, I should say, that have disabilities. So if they are a person with disabilities or full-time caregiver of a minor child, or for whom removal would cause extreme hardship to a spouse, parent, or child, then they also may be able to obtain lawful permanent residency despite the fact that they may not otherwise qualify. So just kind of keep that in mind in the back of your mind. And then again, and this goes for both the DREAM Act and the American Dream and Promise Act, is that after an individual has lawful permanent residency status for 5 years, they can apply for U.S. citizenship through the normal process. There's no unique requirements or standards once you've had the permanent residency for 5 years. Okay, so some other provisions I do want to highlight that are unique to the American Dream and Promise Act that don't exist in the DREAM Acts of 2019 is that this bill would allow states to grant in-state tuition to Dreamers. This is huge, and it may not sound like a big deal for those of us that live in California, because our state laws have already passed legislation, AB 540, that allows individuals to pay in-state tuition, but that is not the case for most of the states throughout this country. So part of this bill would basically allow states to grant in-state tuition so that Dreamers, individuals with the conditional permanent residency, are not paying international student rates. The other major point about this bill is that it would allow individuals with the conditional permanent residence, so if you already have DACA, again, this is you, that you would qualify for federal financial aid. That includes federal student loans, work-study programs, and you would be eligible to obtain professional, commercial, and business licenses. So again, another significant provision that doesn't exist in the DREAM Act. Another significant provision is that those that may have already been deported or removed from the United States or voluntarily departed from the United States after January 20th, 2017, they may be able to apply for the conditional residency abroad. This is huge. There are so many DACA applicants that lost their DACA, perhaps because of criminal acts or for other reasons, or they just got scared. I was doing a consultation with someone yesterday who was in removal proceedings and just decided to leave before they actually completed their proceedings, and that was unfortunate because I feel like people should fight their case and see if until the judge denies their relief, rather than just kind of giving up. And now he's out, married to a U.S. citizen, has 2 U.S. citizen children, and you know, this would benefit him because he would be able to apply for the conditional permanent residence status outside the United States. And then again, this goes the same for both the DREAM Act and the American Dream and Promise Act. Recipients can lose their status, and that applies to permanent residency. I don't think people realize sometimes that permanent residency is a privilege. It's not a right. I've represented people in removal proceedings that have been permanent residences for 30, 40 years, and they end up getting deported because of an act. So just be mindful of that. At any point in time, unless you're a U.S. citizen, you can be removed from the United States. So again, the sooner you can become a U.S. citizen, the better for you, for your family, hopefully for our country. It allows you to fully participate in this country's process. Okay, so in terms of where we are now with this pieces of legislation, like I said before, nothing's really moved much, especially given everything else that's going on in our country and in the world with COVID and the economy, etc. But the American Dream and Promise Act already passed the House of Representatives. It passed last June. So if you're making phone calls, if you're writing letters, if you're sending emails to your federal senators, you're gonna want to encourage them to support and vote for Senate Bill 874, as well as the American Dream and Promise Act. Because those of you who know our civics 101 is once the bill passes one house of Congress, it goes to the other house. So it's passed the House, and now the American Dream and Promise Act is pending in the Senate. And no action has been taken at all whatsoever. The DREAM Act of 2019, Senate Bill 874 is also still pending in the Senate. And then HR 2820, which is the House version of the DREAM Act, is still pending in the House. So still call your congressional representative, but you're gonna, if they voted for HR 6, you're gonna wanna thank them. You're going to just want to acknowledge and thank them for their support and for already doing the right thing. But then you're also going to want to kind of encourage them to support and vote in favor of HR 2820 if and when it should come for a vote. And then, again, just articulate the importance and why this even matters to you. All right, I think I'm going to maybe I'll just mention this briefly, but before I talk about anything related to mental health, let me just take a pause again and see if there's any questions in the chat that I might be able to answer with regards to the legislation we just talked about. Okay, let's take a look. Okay. Yeah, so somebody asked, they looked into becoming a cop, dreamers are not allowed, so how can we join the military? You can't. So again, dreamers would qualify for conditional permanent residency. Again, it's another reason to push for these pieces of legislation. And it's once you are a conditional permanent resident, right, that you would automatically qualify for, but we have to wait for the bill to pass. We have to wait for it to become law. But only until it becomes law will you be able to enlist in the military, and will you be eligible to work as a law enforcement officer of some kind. So again, you can't right now. You have to wait until there is a change in the law. So the other question is, if someone has the permanent unlawful presence bar, we also call that the permanent bar, people who have been either previously deported and come back unlawfully, or people who have accumulated unlawful presence, departed and came back, would you still be able to qualify for the American Dream and Promise Act? That is a very good question, and I'm afraid that we would have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, because again, these are just general parameters of a statute, of a bill. We'll have to wait until the specifics of the regulations actually come out to kind of see where things land. Congress hasn't made a decision. There's still, how should I say, edits and amendments that will likely happen, assuming that these legislations continue to move. So I don't want to say yes or no. I don't know. And I don't think anybody will know until these pieces of legislation become law. Will dreamers be able to become residents? Only if there's a change in the law, right? Only if there is legislation that is passed that allows them to do so, because right now DACA, like I mentioned before, is not legal status. It is not a pathway to permanent residency or citizenship. So only if DACA helps people, only if they have another way to legalize their status, meaning they got married to a U.S. citizen and were able, they had a 245I application or didn't accumulate unlawful presence, and it was safe for them to consular process. So only if they have another avenue to legalize their status will they be able to do so. If there is an administration change after new member, do you see movement on one of the bills? Here's the problem or the challenge. We have to act now. So those of you that may not be familiar with kind of our congressional process, these bills are 2019, 2020. Congress is going to change as a result of these elections. The presidency may change after these elections. That means these bills die at the end of this congressional term. So that is why it's so important, and there's urgency to push and act now. We don't want to wait. So yes, if the administration changes, there will be no more movement. We will have to wait until 2021 when the new Congress comes into place, that they will introduce new bills of their own that may mirror, that may mimic these legislations. But again, it's going to be a whole new Congress, potentially a whole new administration, but that's yet to be seen. So we have to wait. All right, let's keep going. I just want to mention, only because I think it's important, it's slightly off topic, but mental health is a very serious issue and concern of mine in our immigrant communities. And I'm not talking about just those that are nervous and anxious about the Supreme Court decision in DACA. I'm not just talking about our undocumented students or young people or individuals. I'm really talking about anyone who may even be a U.S. citizen who's married to someone who's undocumented or undocumented, somebody who may be a U.S. citizen but their siblings are not, their parents are undocumented. The anxiety and stress really is very real. And I don't want to take it lightly. And I really want to encourage any of you that may show symptoms of PTSD, and I don't take that term very lightly, but it's very real. I don't want you to take it lightly either, in terms of if you do see signs of your mental health depleting, you're depressed, you're losing hope, you're tired, you're exhausted, please, if you have resources available at your college or university, please utilize those resources. It's so important to talk to someone. We see the impact of children, you know, when their parents are removed, that don't eat, that they wet their bed, that they can't sleep. There's just so much. And that's on top of, you know, all the other stresses that this country and this world is going through right now with physical health and COVID and quarantine and unemployment. So I just want to just put a little quick plug in for all of you to really take your mental health seriously and to be looking out for those around you, friends and family and loved ones. And make sure that you're surrounding yourself with a support system that can address some of these issues. And so that affects people who are directly impacted, right, by our immigration policies and laws, COVID, unemployment, but also those that are indirectly impacted, but you're close enough to people who are impacted. So those are people that we call, you know, secondary traumatic stress, vicarious traumatic stress. I've listed some of the symptoms here. You know, if you're finding yourself being really irritable, loss of patience, you're hopeless, you can't sleep, you're just, you know, depressed, you've got headaches, you're socially withdrawn. These are all signs and kind of hopefully red flags for you to pay attention to. Get help. I wish I don't have this expertise. It's not even a service or anything we could offer, but it's certainly something we see and hear on a daily basis with our clients. And so we try as best as possible to create space, right, for people to be able to share and to vent their worry, their stress, or their concern. But we really have to be there for one another and hopefully try to dissipate yeah, just try to help people get some of their stresses out and communicate them so that they can feel and receive support from those around them. So again, not really directly related to our topic, but I just really feel it's so important to mention because there is so much going on that we see every day, and it is concerning. It's concerning to me as a human being to see other people in dire conditions and suffering. So, all right, so let's just talk very briefly, and I do want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions and answers. So we're getting towards the end of our presentation. If you do have questions, please go ahead and start writing those in the chat, and I'll make sure to cover those. But in terms of steps to take, again, if you are a DACA recipient, I would really encourage you to consider renewing your DACA application ASAP. I get people who don't have their DACA application expiring until like the end of 2021. I really don't think it's necessary for you to renew because you still have, you know, more than a year left, and I feel like you may just be wasting your money because you'll lose that year, right? Because you're applying too soon, and I just don't know what the kind of breaking point is where the government may say, hey, we're not going to accept this application for renewal because it's way too far in advance. So again, if you're somewhere close to the 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8 months, I would really encourage you to get that filed ASAP. I want to encourage everybody to explore other options, right? So again, we have been really successful, and I'm really proud. I almost wish I had like a photograph or a picture of our DACA recipients who are now lawful permanent residents or U.S. citizens, because it's so great to see when they're able to legalize their status and the difference that makes for them and for their families. But see and make sure that you aren't eligible to legalize your status because you've now gotten married. Maybe your parents had a petition filed for them that you may be able to use to qualify for a law called 245I that allows you to legalize your status, pay a $1,000 fine without leaving the United States. Perhaps you got advanced parole. There's might be some options available to you there. And, you know, maybe some of you didn't have any accumulation of unlawful presence, and you may be able to consular process with very, very, very little risk. Again, once our embassies and consulates reopen, because they are currently closed. VAWA, the Violence Against Women's Act. If you've ever been a victim of domestic violence, and it goes for women as well as men, please speak with someone about your potential eligibility, because that is an avenue in which you can obtain permanent residency. You may also want to consider a U visa. If you've ever been a victim of a violent crime and you cooperated with law enforcement in the investigation or prosecution of that crime, you may be able to obtain real legal status. Again, DACA is not legal status. The U visa is temporary legal status. It's valid for 4 years. And then after 3 years of having U visa status, you can apply for permanent residency. And you may also be able to include family members as well with your application. So it's like gold. It's really one of the only visas that exist under our immigration laws that essentially forgives every type of violation, whether you have criminal convictions, whether you've been previously ordered removed, if you've triggered the permanent bar, the 10-year bar, if you entered unlawfully. The U visa is the only visa that essentially pardons every type of immigration violation. So if your family member, a loved one, a friend has been a victim of a violent crime, this is something you definitely want to consider and explore. Again, beyond DACA. These options are beyond DACA, but they're very important because I don't think enough DACA recipients, they've become so dependent on DACA and just kind of autopilot, renew, that they're really not paying attention on long-term permanent options. And these are all longer-term permanent options. Parole in place is another option to potentially explore, consider. It's for individuals with immediate family members who are serving or who are veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces. They can get parole, which is basically similar to DACA in terms of prevents them from being removed from the United States, right? So if DACA ends, but you've got PIP, you're still going to be protected. It also gives you that work authorization, but more importantly, PIP also, if you're eligible, may open up other avenues to be able to legalize your status and get permanent residency. So again, those are just kind of a few other options beyond DACA that I want to educate you on and to encourage you to explore or to consider. There are many more. These are probably the most common options that we have been able to utilize for our clients that are DACA recipients or undocumented. So again, just for your information and for you to consider. So other steps to take. Just want to encourage you to stay abreast of changes in the law, know your options, okay? So make sure you're staying abreast of what's happening with the laws and policy. I'm sure the Supreme Court decision will hit the news like nothing else. So make sure your ears and eyes are open for that. Be prepared. Don't wait, like I mentioned before, till the bill passes or becomes law. Start taking actions now to ensure you qualify. Go back to school, get your GED. If you've got criminal convictions, talk with someone who's educated, not just on the criminal side, but understands the immigration consequences, because you want to make sure that that record gets cleaned in a way that's going to be useful and helpful for you. Have a plan. Make sure you've got a plan for your future. It's like DACA may be for many people plan A. Have a plan B. Figure out what you're going to do. We've strategize with many people and our clients to explore other options. We've got families moving to Canada that are relocating to other parts of the world, even if it's temporarily. So again, this is the end of DACA is not the end of your future. It is not the end of your dreams or educational pursuits. And again, use your voice. Share this information with your family, with your friends and community. This Zoom meeting should be sent out along with the PDF of the presentation. We don't mind you sharing it widely with anyone you think that could benefit it. The recording will likely be posted on our website as well. We have a YouTube channel. You can direct people to it, let them hear it if you feel that it would be beneficial. Contact your congressional representative. The number's here on the screen. You can call them at their local office. This is the operator number in DC. You can contact them at their local office. They do ask for your address and they may ask for your name. Again, do not be afraid, especially if you're not a U.S. citizen or if you're undocumented. The reason that they're doing that is not because they're going to call ICE. They just need to verify that you are, in fact, a constituent that lives in their district, right? So you're not someone from Tennessee or Oregon or New York trying to influence their decisions. They want to make sure that the people that they're hearing from are the tax-paying, residents of their district. So don't freak out. Don't, worry about it. You can give them your address. They're not going to do anything with it, but they are keeping tabs and records. And I will tell you that every congressional representative that I've worked with, that I've spoken with, tells me that the anti-immigrant voice is far more effective and productive in communicating with their office than the pro-immigrant voice. So it's time that they hear from us. It's time that they hear that we really want to see real immigration reform and not just a Band-Aid like DACA kind of covering the issues and the problems that we're facing. Again, kind of circling back full circle where we started. I hope all of you benefited from this information. Your move to take action to transform our immigration laws and policies to create a more just, free, and equitable society and world. That's what inspires me. That's what moves me. That's what I love about the work that we are privileged to do every day, is I feel that I'm able to make a difference, a real difference in the lives of individuals, but I also know the ripple effect. And my commitment is to make a difference in this world and in our society, in this globe, not just for my sake, but for future generations. Look for ways. I know some of you are really active in a particular way. It could be, organizing, or it could be, protesting. Look for different ways to engage in public life. So re-engage in a new and different way, whether you're a U.S. citizen or not. Exercise your voice. We need to work and be engaged in changing the outcome of this next election. Do not take it for granted. Don't sit back and then later complain because of an outcome that you're not, happy about. I would say the best thing that you can do right now is to support a candidate that you can get behind, that has alignment with, pro-immigrant, values, or pro-human values, I would say. Help them get elected. Canvass a neighborhood for them, make those phone calls, volunteer. There is nothing that prevents you from volunteering for a campaign. So please, just because you're not a U.S. citizen, don't feel like you can't have a real impact in the outcome of this election. And I don't want to hear any one of you coming and crying and complaining, come November, because the outcome isn't what you wanted. If you didn't do everything you possibly could with your time, your talent, your energy, your treasure to impact the outcome of this election. Explore new modes of expression, right? Whether it be writing, film, theater, social media, business. Share your stories or the stories of your loved one with the world. I'm blown away, especially by our young people and the ways in which they have been able to do this effectively. I feel so old and like an antique in so many ways. Because I just don't have that creativity, and it's just so foreign to me. So I'm really counting on those young people out there that know how to do this and have really beautiful gifts and talents, and can use film and writing and social media to really promote this message. So please use it to the fullest. Again, get concrete. Maybe you've got ideas that go beyond the DREAM Act, that go beyond the American Dream and Promise Act. Share them with your congressional representative. Let's start setting the stage, right? Not just beyond DACA, but beyond 2020. So let's look to 2021. Let's just assume for a moment DACA ends, American Dream and Promise Act doesn't pass or doesn't move, the DREAM Acts don't pass and don't move. So let's start a conversation with our congressional representatives now in terms of legislation we would want them to draft and introduce in the next congressional era. Just because these bills don't move, just because DACA may end, like I said, it is not the end. It is in fact just the beginning, and this is really a unique time in history, and we really need to do everything we possibly can to dream bigger, to dream beyond DACA, and to take action, right? To take action on the DREAM Act. It is an act and it requires some action. So please take action now on the bills that are already in existence. And then I would encourage you to support undocumented businesses, those people, and it's so creative. There's some really amazing institutions that have helped entrepreneurship amongst our DACA recipients, that they've been able to create their own businesses, or people that are undocumented that have herbal businesses, food businesses, gardening businesses, floral businesses, you name it. If you know of them, I would love to create a resource on our website for undocumented business. So if you know of any businesses out there that you would like to have featured on our resource page, please share it with us. Send us an email to info@usilg.net. Put it in the chat, and we'll do our best to compile that, because I think it's really important to support people, especially in this economy and a high unemployment. We know that, you know, many of our individuals, even U.S. citizens married to undocumented people, not qualifying for the stimulus checks, etc. People are struggling. So I want to be able to support those who have legitimate businesses that we can all utilize during this time. And then I guess the last thing before we turn to questions that I want to perhaps leave you with, especially because of the racial injustice and the charge in our country right now, is for all of us. And I think if that you're in front of a computer or a device right now, you are privileged. It may not feel that way, it may not seem that way, but you are. And I promise you that there are people that aren't as privileged as you right now because of your position, your status, etc. So this goes for everyone. It's not just for those that, you know, are educated or, you know, employed or professionals or lawyers or leaders, etc. But I want to ask all of you to really think about how you can use your privilege to open the doors for a documented or undocumented, an undocumented young person to rise, lead, and thrive. So just think about that, please, for a second. What can you do? How can you use your privilege to extend a hand, to mentor, to support, to employ, to educate someone who doesn't have the same access that you have right now? So with that, I want to share with you some community organizations that you may want to look into getting involved with, or checking out the resources available to you. I think it's important that we're all working together. So Immigrant Rising, it provides resources on college application process, entrepreneurship, mental health that I mentioned earlier, consultations. The Dreamers Roadmap is a national mobile app that helps undocumented students find scholarships and go to college, because we know that there's a lot of scholarships that you may not qualify for as a dreamer. CHIRLA, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles, has legal immigration services, as well as community education and outreach, civic engagement, policy and advocacy efforts. Catholic Charities of Orange County and Los Angeles, as well as World Relief. Here in Orange County, they do support with DACA renewals. In fact, I do believe that they have resources where their assistance is free, and they may actually have funding to pay the $495 application fee. So again, I highly encourage you to check out these organizations. If you're from an organization, again, that you would like to be included, again, we're going to be updating our resource page here in the next week or so. Please send us your information, what you do, your address, phone number, website, and we're happy to, you know, take a look at the organization, ensure that there's alignment between our work, our mission, and your mission, and we will consider posting your information as well to be available to our community. But again, none of us can do this alone. I'm here to support you. If you represent educational institution, a nonprofit organization, a religious organization or institution, you would like us to partner doing a webinar, seminar, you know, speaking engagement. We do it on all sorts of topics. We're constantly trying to educate, equip, and empower our communities in any way we can. We would love, love, love to partner with you. So please feel free to email us at info@usilg.net. Or, you know, put your message in your chat and we will reach out to you. Those of you that want to know more details about the specific pieces of legislation, I highly encourage you to visit two particular websites, the National Immigrant Legal Center. The links are here on the slide, as well as the Immigration Forum, which is another nonprofit for you to take a look at, and there has additional details on these bills and their summaries. All right, with that, then I will go ahead and take questions right now. I see if a hand is raised, and you're gonna have to forgive me because although I'm used to participating in Zoom, I'm not, how should I say, as well versed. We used to use a different platform. I see that there's people with their hand raised. I'm gonna see if there is a way for me to, I don't know if there's a way for me to unmute them to be able to speak. Just give me 1 second. All right, I saw, okay, let me see. That might not be possible. I'm not seeing that available here. So let me just, if you do have a question, I really apologize. We'll get better with this. And if there's a way for us to unmute so people could speak, I love that engagement. But right now I can't figure out how to do that. So I am going to go back to the chat and just look at the questions in terms of where we left off. So let me just go back here. Okay, someone asked, it looks like I had missed this question. What do they mean waivers for family unity? So if you're talking about the specific waiver that is in existence, it's basically for people who don't otherwise qualify for conditional residence because for whatever reason they don't have the educational requirement. Maybe they don't have a GED, they don't have the high school diploma. The American Dream and Promise Act allows for kind of another avenue. So if you don't meet those general requirements, they've established what they call like a hardship waiver. So if you're mentally incapacitated, you are special needs, so you weren't able to get a GED or high school diploma, there is still an avenue for you to get conditional residence. You would just have to demonstrate some sort of hardship in order for you to be able to qualify under that kind of sub avenue or direction. So again, it's a little bit outside the normal process, but I think what's beautiful about the American Dream and Promise Act, it's really thought through those unique circumstances of people that otherwise should be included, but may not be able to satisfy those basic requirements because they're caring for a loved one, a child that they can't go back to school, they can't get their GED, or they have special needs. So I realize I skipped that question earlier. All right, so will dreamers be able to become residents? So assuming, again, that these bills or some bills similar to them pass, that's the only way. So right now, unless you have an alternate way, sometimes we can make it work, but again, it's independent of being a dreamer or DACA. So my prayer is yes, but not yet until we actually see immigration reform. So, let's see, I answered that question. Can we still apply for the Promise Act? So please keep in mind that these are just bills, they're proposals, they're just pieces of legislation that have not passed yet. That's why we're having this conversation, and I need all of you to engage your congressional representative and try to get them to pass these bills and make them law before November. And again, they may pass, even if, like, let's just say Congress acts tomorrow and all of these pieces of legislation get passed, both houses. Again, we don't know what will happen once it gets to the president's desk, whether he'll sign these bills into law, right? So we've got the three branches of government. Everybody's worried and anxious about the Supreme Court right now, the judicial branch, which again is going to have an impact on DACA. Right now, I'm talking to you about the legislative branch, and then that obviously will funnel over to the executive branch, this administration, as to whether or not these actually become law before they will expire in November. All right. If a parent has had a sibling petition them, would that help me in any way as a DACA recipient? Possibly. So again, we always ask about petitions filed for parents. So whether a sibling, an employer, a spouse previously, etc., there may be an avenue that could benefit you. It really depends on what the parent did with that petition, but it usually means that the DACA recipient could use that for 245I. So let's say they got married and don't otherwise qualify. They may be able to legalize their status here in the United States by using that parent's, sibling petition to be able to go forward with the process. So yes, it may help, but I can't tell you for sure without really looking at your specific case, but it's definitely something worth exploring. If you've had unlawful presence before but no longer have it, can something be done towards obtaining status? It just depends. Like I said, if you haven't had a consultation with a competent immigration lawyer, I really encourage you to do so or to give us a call. If you've had unlawful presence, it doesn't erase or go away. So if you maybe got 3 years of unlawful presence before getting DACA and that unlawful presence has been kind of halted, but we don't know about the future, you still have 3 years of unlawful presence. Again, any unlawful presence after the age of 18 will count. But again, there may be other options, waivers, 245I, other laws or regulations that may allow you to obtain legal status. So it's not a question about whether you've had lawful presence or don't have lawful presence. It's really about what opportunities exist for you right now that you may be able to utilize to apply for legal status. Okay, so somebody mentioned, I recently got my stimulus check and it said I was a US citizen. So I'm wondering if I got it as well because my dad was granted his this last year. I am already over the age to get my citizenship with this petition because it took him around 15 years. Okay, this is a really great question. It intrigues me and interests me. It's not one that I can really answer clearly without assessing specificities in terms of dates and timing and age and when your dad became a citizen, whether you got the stimulus check by mistake or whether you're in fact a US citizen. I would really encourage you to contact us to schedule a consultation. And I guess just for the interest of full disclosure, right now during COVID time, we haven't fully reopened our office to walk-ins or for clients to come in. Our consultations can be telephonic or via Zoom, and we are only charging $50. We typically charge $100 for consultations. Right now, because of the economy and situation, we're trying to be as available as possible. You can visit our website and schedule a consultation at your convenience. And again, it's only $50 right now. So it may be worth the investment or at least go somewhere else. You just want to be careful where you go because there are so many bad lawyers or people who call themselves lawyers and not. So just make sure you go somewhere reputable, either to a Department of Justice accredited representative that's registered, like Catholic Charities or World Relief, or a competent immigration attorney. Just make sure you're checking out the reviews, you're doing your due diligence, perhaps going off of a referral of someone else that, had good service from them. Just be careful. But I highly encourage you to talk to somebody that you can get, really accurate, advice from. Are DACA recipients able to vote for representatives? No, absolutely not. Only US citizens can vote. Okay, so you want to be very careful. I can't tell you the number of people right now that we're working with that are in the process of applying for US citizenship. And unbeknownst to them, they had registered to vote. Those records are kept by the government, and they're actually, basis is not only to get denied your citizenship, but also to get your green card revoked. It is illegal to vote in a federal, state, or local election unless you're a US citizen. So those of you that are in college, you have those voter registration drives. People may have approached you to sign this or that. Just be very careful. Until you're a US citizen, you're not allowed to vote. However, that doesn't mean that you're not a tax-paying constituent and someone that your congressional representative is interested in hearing from. If you shop, if you pay taxes, then you have you have as much right as a US citizen to voice your opinion. You live in their district, your taxes are going to pay for the government, services and resources. So please don't let that keep you from being engaged with your congressional representative. You just cannot vote. You can't vote in this election. What are the options for DACA parents that are undocumented? Any hopes? It depends. I am hopeful. I'm a person of hope. I believe in creating very encouraging and empowering contexts that I'm not one to I'm kind of the worst person, to be honest, to sulk with. I'm not a sulker. I don't believe in sulking. I don't think it serves anyone. But there's always hope, right? And my hope right now resides not necessarily in DACA, although I would be happy if DACA continues. I just don't think it's great. I don't think it's enough. I think it's settling, to be quite honest, for what this country really needs. So my hope is in our young people. My hope is in this generation, whether we elect different people to Congress, people who are pro-human, immigrant, minority, just people who can do the right thing, right? That's in the best interest of this country. If there's one thing that's really disturbed me, I think, is just the actions and words that have been communicated by various politicians that just aren't supportive and not keeping what's in the best interest of our country in mind as a whole. Self-interest, privileged interest seem to be the more of the norm. And so my hope is that, yes, there's hope for DACA. There's hope for undocumented people, undocumented people, their families, their parents, but we have to push, we have to act, we have to work for it. It's not something that we're going to be able to just sit back and just wait, kind of wait to happen. We all have to be engaged. We have to engage others in this work. So that's my contribution, are sessions and webinars like this, because I do want to encourage and support as many of you as possible and your organizations and institutions. And I do my part as an individual and as a citizen and as a taxpayer, but we all have to do our part. So it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be tomorrow, but there's definitely hope. I had a consultation at a local community college recently of a student who didn't even realize that she was a U.S. citizen. I mean, her and her mother were in tears. And those are miracles, and those are rare gold moments in, the work that we do, but they happen. And I'm a big believer in miracles, and I believe that there's hopes and opportunities for legalization for everyone. We just need to be educated. And if there isn't an immediate opportunity, then we need to be educated and equipped in terms of what our rights are. So if we do get in contact with ICE, we need to know our rights and what to do and what not to do, what to say, what not to say, to ask to see a judge, to not sign our voluntary departure. There's so many things that people can do. I'm not a big believer in victims. I believe everybody has the opportunity to be educated and equipped to make informed decisions that are in the best interest of themselves and their families. So yes, I believe there are many, many hopes. And my hope is really a lot in all of you that are listening. The fact that you took time to listen to this webinar today gives me great hope. Can I apply for residency through my grandparents? My mother refuses to apply for residency through them. So not directly, but it's something definitely to look at. So sometimes there are ways in which a grandparent's legal status kind of trickles through a parent to a grandchild. Again, it's something we would have to look very carefully through. Our intake form is designed to screen for all of these unusual issues. So there is a question about grandparents on there. We'll take a look at it. If something can be done, we'll let you know. How can I check my status of citizenship? So assuming you've got a pending application, again, there's a lot of changes right now happening during this COVID and quarantine. USCIS has just recently reopened their offices. Interviews will begin, actually today is the first day of interviews being scheduled. They're being rescheduled in the order that they should have happened. So if you had your interview scheduled, or if you've already had your interview, your application should now start moving a bit more quickly. You can Google USCIS case status. The first link should take you to a page where you can enter, your receipt number, and then that will tell you kind of the last action taken on your case. You can also sign up at My USCIS, and that will give you real-time notifications anytime that your application is moved, whether from one office to another, any action that's been taken. You can sign up for that so you get those alerts. And you can also check the processing time. So if you Googled USCIS processing time, click the first link at that top, and you go to N400 and you select the particular office that your application may be pending at. That'll give you a more realistic time frame in terms of the processing time. So everything is taking a lot longer, but those are 3 options, I guess, for you to look at. Check your case status, USCIS check case status. You can register on myuscis.gov, or you can check the processing time, and that will give you some really concrete information. I applied for Medi-Cal because of my pregnancy, and they did not give me emergency Medi-Cal. They gave me regular Medi-Cal. Will that affect me in any way? So with the public charge, and if those of you not familiar with the public charge rule that went into effect in February, we have a separate webinar. You can access that on our website that goes into great detail in terms of the types of public benefits that can impact an individual's eligibility for residency. So during pregnancy, Medi-Cal should not be a problem. I would just kind of be careful and ensure that, you know, after the baby's delivered, 60 days after, that you're not continuing to be enrolled in Medi-Cal after that, because there is an exception for periods of time during and after, shortly after pregnancy. So I do want to be mindful. I have about 4 more questions I'm going to answer. Those of you that do need to leave, I just again want to thank you for joining us. You have my contact information on this slide, our handles for Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Would love to hear from you through Facebook, or email us at info@usilg.net. I will stay on to answer these last few questions, but I know those of you that do need to go, I just want to say thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and we look forward to hopefully hearing and seeing you soon, and thank you for all that you do. All right, so would PIP allow for police officers who want to petition a family member, or just only military? So unfortunately, it is only U.S. Armed Forces. It includes the Coast Guard, Army, Navy, and Marines, and those that are on reserves, so not just those that are enlisted full-time. Is there a possibility for parents of a child that has microtia unilateral with loss of hearing to obtain permanent residency? Is been DACA recipient help? Okay, so assuming that that child is a U.S. citizen, I will tell you that the condition of having a child with any type of medical condition or special needs is not an avenue for people to get permanent residency. That being said, it could be a strong defense if someone's in removal proceedings, right? So there are certain types of relief that exist in court that do not exist outside of court. However, that being said, I would never encourage or intentionally put someone in removal proceedings to try and apply for relief, because it is very difficult to win. And I would hate to put someone in a worse position than they are basically without status, meaning that if they're not successful, they could be ordered removed and taken out of the country. So you want to be very, very careful. Again, DACA may or may not help because it prevents the accumulation of unlawful presence. That child, if they're 21, may be able to petition you. I don't know the age of that child. So again, something that you may want to explore, but their condition alone will not be sufficient. I have 245I protection, and my mom just got her green card this year. What is the process for me? I'm 32 now and had several years of unlawful presence before DACA. So again, unfortunately, I'm really not able to answer that question to give you reliable advice. It would be in your best interest and mine to avoid, malpractice and giving you, inaccurate advice for you to schedule a consultation with our office so that we can really assess your case and ascertain what, if any, options you might be able to have. And there may be some options for you. It's just going to depend on the specifics of your case. For the parent that had a petition, if the parent has passed away, will that petition still be able to be used? Possibly. There are some grandfathering clause that allows derivative beneficiaries. It depends if the person that's trying to use the benefit was alive not necessarily when the petition was filed, but any point in time prior to it being used. There's some nuances in the law that we would have to look at to see if they can still in fact use it. Most of the time it is yes, but I can't tell you for sure without looking into that. So how can you benefit from the 245I law? Okay, so again, I thought this law had expired. 245I is a law that has existed. It's been essentially extended 3 times. The last time it was extended was December 21st, 2000. It essentially says that anyone that had a petition filed on or before April 30th, 2001 may be able to legalize their status in the United States without departing if they pay a $1,000 fine. So again, there are no new petitions, but if someone had a petition that was filed before April 30th, 2001, that's when we can use that petition. So the law has not been extended, meaning that if you had a petition, filed on May 1st, 2001, that's not going to help you. It's only for those people that were lucky enough or fortunate enough to have had a family member or employer petition for them or their parents before April 30th, 2001. If you are a U.S. citizen, can you petition for undocumented parents that have been in the country for over 20 years? They entered unlawfully. So, great question. What I will tell you is there's a better question, I always say. So the question isn't so much whether you can petition for the undocumented parent, because I will tell you 9 times out of 10, it is yes. The question really is, or the better question is, whether those undocumented parents can legalize their status, meaning will they be able to finish the process to be able to become permanent residents? And that just depends. We would have to look at that case and to see what options there are for them to either legalize here in the United States, whether they would be subject to consular processing, what risks would be involved, but it all depends on like when they entered, how many years of unlawful presence, other violations, et cetera, et cetera. So we'd have to look very carefully to ascertain whether or not there's even a basis or a good reason to start the petition. I'm a big believer of, why start a process you can't finish? There are many attorneys that will be like, yes, absolutely, you're a U.S. citizen, file the petition. At the end of the day, the petition is approved and like, oh, we're really sorry, but there's nothing else you can do with that petition. So just make sure the questions that you're asking your legal representative is really kind of long-term. It's not just, can I file the petition? Do my parents qualify to legalize their status? And how? You really want to be very clear on that strategy, because we hear and see too often that people are, sent outside without a way of getting back. People file applications that they're not entitled to or qualify for, and that ends up getting them in removal proceedings. There's a lot of, I'd like to say, well-intentioned people that don't know what they're doing that really cause a great deal of harm. But I also know that there's a lot of bad actors out there that really prey and look to take advantage of our immigrant community. So just be very, very careful. All right, questions keep coming in. So if a child receives Social Security for disability, does that affect eligibility for parents to become permanent resident? So if the child is a U.S. citizen, no, they're entitled to SSI, benefits. But what you really do have to look at for that parent is that if and when they're applying for permanent residency, the government's going to look at the totality of the circumstances. And that parent's going to basically need to be able to convince the government that they are not going to be dependent on government resources to be able to support them. So yes, that child is entitled to SSI. It won't directly or immediately impact the parent, but there's a bigger question that needs to be looked at when the parent is applying for permanent residency. So I'm currently married. My spouse that is a DACA recipient. Is there a time frame I would have to wait until I can petition for them? No. But again, the bigger or better question is not just whether or not to petition for them. Is there a way for them to legalize their status? That's really the question you want to be asking. So yeah, I think that's get a consultation would be the best thing, but there's no waiting period just because they have DACA. We have people that we prepare petitions for, and we are literally waiting for their marriage certificate to come to them and simply insert it in the filing. So literally you can file as soon as you are legally married. All right. Okay, so I think this concludes, it is now 12:46, our webinar for for today. Again, I want to thank you all for joining us. It is a privilege, like I said, for us to be a resource for all of you and your communities, your organizations. So again, if I haven't said it enough, if you need anything, if you would like our support in any way, please let us know, call us, email us, visit our website, sign up for our e-newsletter. You can schedule consultations, anytime, 24/7 through our website as well. So again, I thank you for joining us, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. And hopefully you'll join us for our Q&A with the Supreme Court decision once that gets issued. And I'm, committed to be able to provide you the best and most accurate legal information there is. So thank you again, and have a great day.